3, hit it!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And today I'm going to be sharing part 2 of a little user's guide to mental health. And I call it a user's guide because it is a user, me, sharing what I've seen that's been very helpful to me around mental health and that I know has been very helpful to many of the people I've shared it with. The usual disclaimers apply. This is not meant as a substitute for medical advice. It's just something to consider that a lot of people find very helpful when they consider. And if you want to go deeper into it, as well as the other parts in this series, there's a free program we offer at michaelneill.org/basic course called The Basic Course in Living from the Inside Out. And in 12 short sessions, I cover this in a different way in a lot more depth. The other resource that I recommend, in fact, today's session is an excerpt from a book by one of my mentors, a woman named Mavis Karn, called It's That Simple, A User's Manual for Human Beings. And I've actually shared this story in the podcast once before, but it felt very appropriate to share today. And it's called A Story About Buses. I was brought up in a family that, for as far back as I can remember, shared the belief that any time a bus came by, we had to get on it and ride it to wherever it was going. We didn't know that we believed that. It was simply a way of life to us that we never questioned. I, along with the rest of my family, spent most of my waking hours on buses, spent most of my money on bus fares, and found myself frequently lost and wandering around places I didn't want to be, and wondering why I was always so tired and joyless and confused. One morning, as I was standing at the bus stop ready for another long day of bus rides ahead, a man I'd never seen before said to me, "Excuse me, but why are you always riding the buses?" "Well," I said somewhat defensively, "everyone knows that's what buses are for, to ride. My whole family has always ridden them all day long, sometimes even all night long." He looked at me as though I was the one who was strange. "That's not what buses are for," he said. "They're for getting you where you want to go. Haven't you noticed that everyone doesn't always ride every bus?" The man was beginning to annoy me with his peculiar ideas, so I ignored him and climbed on the very next bus that came along. One day, while I was feeling particularly tired, frustrated, and a little bit hopeless about my life, I looked out the bus window and saw people walking, sitting, laughing, talking, and just simply enjoying themselves. I very much wanted to feel what they seemed to be feeling. I decided to see what would happen if I just once let the bus go by without getting on it. As I sat at the bus stop, I saw the next bus coming, and I looked around nervously to see if anyone from my family could see me. And instead of getting on, I let the bus go by. It was a very strange, unfamiliar, and somewhat confusing sensation. Then another bus came by, and another, but I let them all go by. It was still awkward and unfamiliar, but it was getting easier and easier. Soon, I noticed that I still had the money I would have spent on those buses, and I hadn't gotten lost once all day. In fact, the more buses I didn't get on, the more energy I had. Then along came a bus that was on its way to where I wanted to go, so I jumped on. I got off at my destination, and all of a sudden I knew that the stranger at the bus stop had been right. Buses are just there to help me get where I want to go, and I don't have to ride the ones that will get me lost or take me to places I don't want to be. There was nothing wrong with me or even with buses. I had just believed something that turned out to be untrue. Now, I always wonder whether sharing the moral of the story is necessary or even helpful, but in this case, I do want to be explicit about what the story is about, because the story is about all our minds. Our minds are full of thinking, and when we struggle with our mental health, they tend to be full of a lot of thinking and a lot of not very fun thinking. And if you think of a thought like a bus, or I sometimes use the metaphor of a train of thought, you don't have to get on every bus just because it passes through your mind. In fact, you can let as many buses go by until you find one that's actually something that you would enjoy thinking about, something that it would be genuinely helpful to think about. And those are the thoughts you can go with. Those are the buses you can get on and ride and see where they take you. But if you're like most of us, you grew up thinking that if there was a thought in your head, it must be your thought, and it must be meaningful. And it's so cool to start to realize that the thoughts that pass through your head aren't what you think. They're just thoughts that pass through your head. And you don't have to take ownership of them, and you don't have to let them take you for a ride. And when you don't, when you get used to hanging out at the bus stop until a thought you really want to go with comes along, you start to spend more and more time in your mental health and less time struggling. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.